Kinsey Schofield here. Welcome to Royally Unfiltered, the show that takes you behind palace gates like never before. This week, helping me tackle all the biggest headlines is royal author Sally Bedell Smith and former press secretary to the late Queen Elizabeth II and King Charles III, Dickie Arbiter. Dickie, you're raising money for a great cause. Will you tell everybody about that before we begin?
Well, I do a lot of horse riding, and we're riding in fancy dress on the 13th of September. It's a 3 hour ride, about 10 miles, and I'm doing it for the Royal Marsden Cancer Charity. So if you're interested, go onto my website and it'll all be there, a link. Let's have your money, global,
We'll link
good
it in the
cause.
description of this video too, so that people can quickly access that. Thanks for doing that, Dickie. I think that that says a lot about you, and I'm really impressed. So thank you so much for doing that. All right,
Well, thank you for mentioning
on to some happier news. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle
it.
have gone suspiciously quiet lately. And I wonder how much of it has to do with these revelations. Sally Bedell Smith revealed in her Substack Royals Extra how deeply hurt Queen Elizabeth was by Prince Harry's actions. And cue the avalanche of similar stories from other respected royal reporters. It's just to the point that we can't ignore it now. First of all, this is one of the stories that I felt like was under the radar. I wish it had more attention. But Lady Elizabeth Anson reached out to the Queen on the phone, Sally, and she said, "How are you?" She only received 2 phone calls a day, and she no longer received those phone calls. It was her sister and her mother. And Lady Elizabeth said that very few people called the Queen. Once I said, "Ma'am, do you mind that I call you?" And she said she liked it very much. And that the only one who calls her regularly is Sophie, the wife of Prince Edward. Sophie
Yeah.
completely respects the Queen, but she also understands that she is a human being and treats her that way. The rest of the family all make appointments to have tea with her. Sally, am I being too sensitive and interpreting this as that the Queen was potentially lonely sometimes?
I think she was, and I think as you mentioned, before the deaths of her sister and her mother, really within 2 months of one another, in early 2002, she spoke on the phone pretty much every day to each of them, wherever they were around the world, wherever she was around the world. And as she said to Lady Elizabeth Anson, she said, I no longer have those 2 calls every day. And I think, she was obviously grieving over the loss of them, but they were so tightly connected. And so Lady Elizabeth, who had known her actually since she was a child, she was born. A lot of people say she was born in Windsor Castle, but Liza, as she very sweetly asked that I call her, said she was born in a house on the grounds of the Windsor Great Park. So she wasn't actually born in the castle, but her godfather was King George VI. Her great aunt was Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. She was a cousin of Elizabeth and Margaret, and so she knew them very well for so many years. And so Liza sort of jumped into the breach, and she started calling her fairly regularly and became a confidant, and also would invite her over to her house near Notting Hill. And she would have tea there and lunch there and dinner there. And Liza, since she was related to the Scandinavian royal family, they were all interconnected thanks to Queen Victoria, and so she would assemble groups of them to have dinner with her. So she was very kind to her, and the Queen reached out to her and told her basically what was on her mind. And we now know that in the run up to Meghan and Harry's wedding, she had a lot on her mind.
That's right. We're going to get into that. But Dickie, talk to me about what a champion Sophie is and how lucky we are to have Sophie. I was also reading an article recently about how she decided to step back and not attend Princess Diana's funeral because she thought it might upset people because of their similar looks. She didn't want to startle anybody or overwhelm anybody. Dickie, you've engaged with her. Is she as wonderful as she seems?
She is a terrific lady. They had a bit of a bumpy start. They got married in 1999. Edward was a television producer. Sophie was a public relations consultant. And she got caught in a sting in 2001 by a fake sheikh. And she's alleged to have rubbished some of the family. She's alleged to have rubbished politicians. Well, who doesn't rubbish politicians? Yeah. It's a game. We do it all the time. They deserve it. But she got caught. The News of the World were going to run the story. This is a brief rundown. The communications secretary traded off the newspaper, the story, to give the newspaper an interview and a photograph, not to run the story. Okay, they didn't do it. They ran a photograph on the Sunday, big headline, "My Edward's not gay," which was absolute rubbish anyway. And the following Monday, the whole story was run by the Daily Mail.
Oh, no.
And then on the Friday, the News of the World came and said, well, the Daily Mail got it wrong. We've got to correct the story. So they not only had the interview on the Sunday, one Sunday, they had the whole story the following Sunday. But she's a terrific lady. She didn't actually go out of her way to endear herself to the Queen. She is a nice person. And she married, people always said Andrew is the favorite son. They were all favorite children as far as the Queen was concerned. But Edward was always slightly reserved. And the Queen was very pleased when Sophie married Edward, because we gave the impression of being a bit of a loner, but he is very much upfront. He's very quiet about the way he does things. But he and Sophie did a very good match. We saw it at the 25th wedding anniversary, wonderful pictures of Sophie hugging Edward in public, which is completely unheard of amongst royals. And she was a favorite with the Queen. She was able to talk to the Queen. She photographed the Queen. Prince Philip liked her. She's just a lovely person from a well-to-do family background, but just one of those nice people. Not many of them in the early days of the royal family as far as royal wives were concerned, but she was certainly up there, up front.
I love to hear that. And I love that Lady Elizabeth gave us that insight into Sophie's sweet heart. Absolutely.
Well,
right. Go ahead.
No. I mean, one of the things she said to me was that, she is very down to earth and she treated the Queen like a normal human being. Yeah. And I think the Queen confided a lot in her, and she became very close to her. I think, as I recall, the Sophie and Edward and their children would have sort of Sunday lunch with the Queen and Prince Philip every week. And there was a wonderful moment. I think, believe it or not, it was for the Prince Philip's 90th birthday. And they went over to Sophie and Edward's house. And he was actually jumping on the trampoline with Sophie and Edward's two children. But they just had a lovely informal relationship with them. And I think obviously Edward really pitched in on the Duke of Edinburgh's awards, and the Duke of Edinburgh always wanted Edward to have that title, which he now has. And he has done so much to expand and increase awareness of the Duke of Edinburgh's awards. So they did have a close family. And to take a slight swerve into Meghan, I remember talking to Liza Anson about before the wedding, and she said, I really hope that she goes to Sophie for advice. But she said, I'm afraid she probably won't, which of course she didn't.
Right.
Would have been a very good idea.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
I'd like to add in here. Yeah, I'd like to add in here that Sophie does a lot of incredibly good work that most people would never do. She goes to countries that you and I would never go to on the African continent. She highlights the abuse to women, sexual assault of women, battered wives, and brings this out to the front. Somebody like that didn't do it. It wouldn't come to world attention. And she does this sort of thing. She does it very quietly, no fanfare. But the press in the UK have sort of latched onto this woman, saying, hey, this is somebody we've got to follow. And they do follow her, and they do report on her, where, say, 5-6 years ago, people would say, Sophie who? Yeah. Now they know exactly who she is.
Dickie's absolutely right. She and Edward are front and center. They are vital members of the royal family now. And you're right, they went unrecognized for far too long.
Well, you mentioned I've also heard that the Queen was hoping that Sophie could be somewhat of a mentor to Meghan, and Meghan at one point said,
Yeah.
"No, I don't need her. I've got Prince Harry," which was, "Do you? I mean, he's not. You didn't even know like the national anthem and all these and certain protocol because clearly Prince Harry didn't step up and introduce you to these things
Yeah.
or open those doors for you." So,
Nobody could mentor Meghan.
uh,
Impossible.
Yeah.
She's a
No,
law
I
unto
agree.
herself.
yeah.
And she wouldn't listen to anybody. You know, you've got to look at the woman. She was an actress in a soap. The soap was coming to an end. She was being written out of it. Hollywood didn't gallop a path to her front door to offer her parts. But hey, Harry came along, and my goodness, you know, this guy's got a title. He's probably got money. She's a lonely woman or a woman alone, and they got married. You know, she was a divorced woman. Why did she get married in a white dress? A divorced woman, why did she wear a veil? The other thing, and Sally will bear this up, that really annoyed the Queen was that the Archbishop of Canterbury officiated at St. George's Chapel. Now, he has no jurisdiction there. He was asked by Harry, without asking the Queen. St. George's Chapel, like Westminster Abbey and quite a number of other churches around the United Kingdom, are what are called royal peculiars. They come under the jurisdiction of the sovereign. The sovereign decides who preaches in them. The sovereign decides who is the dean of them. The sovereign decides whether the Archbishop of Canterbury can preach in them. Not Harry, but he decided, and she was very upset about that. And
Yeah.
you could see it in the service. You know, having watched her at so many of the royal marriages, where she was very relaxed, she was smiling. This one, I hate to say this, but she had a face like a meat axe.
Oh,
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, and that was one of the things that Lady Elizabeth Anson told me, and in several months before the wedding, she said that Harry was rude to his mother for 10 minutes, and she said, and I couldn't figure out quite what she was talking about, but I understand it better now. She said Harry thought his grandmother could do anything. And so he didn't think that it was necessary to um, follow the protocol and have the Dean of Windsor to ask him, how the officiating should go during the wedding, and he just completely ignored the sort of the protocol that the Dean of Windsor should do it. And he just went straight to the Archbishop of Canterbury. And Liza said to me, she said the Queen was very upset. It may seem not that upsetting to us, but to the Queen, who was the supreme governor of the Church of England, was extremely sensitive to something like that violated the protocol. And
And
it was just one of the many things that really annoyed her about
the Dean of
the way
Windsor at
Harry
the
and
time, the
mm,
Dean of Windsor at the time was a gentleman called David Connor, a lot of years under his belt. I think he retired
yes,
sometime in 2023. And he's the man that was in charge, like the current Dean Conningham is in charge of St. George's Chapel, and what the Dean says goes. And any cleric that comes in to preach has to have the sovereign's permission after being put up by the Dean on a recommendation.
right.
And David Connor had officiated at so many major occasions, and to be sidelined by Harry and Meghan in getting the Archbishop of Canterbury. And if you remember, Sally, during the Oprah interview, they said they had got married a few days beforehand in the backyard. My goodness, Windsor Castle and the grounds, tens of so many acres. It's not exactly a backyard. I know it's an Americanism, but we don't call Windsor Great Park the
No,
backyard.
I mean, I think they did it at Nottingham Cottage. I think that's what they said, that they had this little secret ceremony that wasn't actually legal, but for whatever reason, they wanted to do it. And it was not only flagrantly violating the rules, it was just mildly ridiculous.
well, I think the
It was just a
Archbishop
lie.
said, yeah, the Archbishop said it never happened. But Sally, the idea that Prince Harry just thinks that the way that you describe it is that Prince Harry thinks that the Queen can just snap her fingers and make it happen for him. We're still seeing that. We see that in Harry's fight with the UK government when he sits down with the BBC and says his father could make this all go away. Why is he so entitled? Why does he not understand that there are certain rules in place and those rules are in place for a reason? And his loved ones can't just make certain things go away for him. Did they
Can I
do
just
too
can I
often?
just come in here?
Yeah.
Why does he do this? Every bus has a driver,
Yeah.
and he's not the driver.
That's a pretty good.
Well, I think it's a measure of entitlement, and whether he was like that to that degree before Meghan came along, it seems almost. At least he had no means of expressing that. But once Meghan arrived on the scene, he just became very sort of pushy and I want it my way. There was a moment, as I mentioned earlier, when I was with Liza Anson and we watched the engagement interview, and she was really impressed with Meghan and said she thought she was very bright. She said, "I worry a little bit that she may overshadow Harry." Boy, that was prescient. And then later on, she met with Meghan in February. The wedding was May 19th, and met with her. And I think the Queen wanted Liza to be invited. She had almost 60 years or 50 years of planning weddings by then. And she wanted her to be involved. And Meghan said, "Well, I can't do anything about that because Harry's in Africa, and Harry will write you a letter." And he wrote a letter and he said, "But my grandmother's quite content with what we're doing." And then Liza talked to the Queen, who she, for reasons I wish I'd always asked her, but she called her my Jemima. And she said, I asked her, why? And she didn't really know. And she said to me, this was interesting. I didn't write this, but she said to the Queen, "Don't worry about it. They're not involving you. They're doing it on their own. But there is a wedding in October, and Eugenie, actually, Liza called her Eugenie, and that's going to be in October." Liza was planning it, working very closely with her, and the Queen was very involved in it. And Liza said, "This is going to be your family wedding."
Aww.
Because one of the things, and it was much more of a family wedding than Harry and Meghan, where they invited people they barely knew.
Oprah Winfrey, George Clooney. Also, do you remember
Yeah.
how Meghan announced her pregnancy at that wedding? How rude was that, Sally?
That's right. It was. Yeah, she did that. But the other thing that Liza talked to me about is that Harry and Meghan just disinvited or didn't invite a whole group of cousins, the children of the Prince and Princess Michael of Kent, of the Gloucesters. She just X'd them out. She and Harry just X'd them out of the guest list. And they added all these other random people who barely even knew the royal family. All those people, members of the family, were included in Eugenie's wedding in October. And that was just yet another irritation for the Queen. I remember Liza said, "Don't worry about this wedding. You're not involved." But the Queen said, "But it's my house.
Yeah.
I'm paying for it." But Liza said, "Just concentrate on Royal Ascot and then concentrate on the real family wedding in October." I didn't write that, but she did tell me that.
Well, that's
Yeah,
sweet.
let's not forget Sally. She was also footing the bill.
Yeah, she was. That's what she said. "I'm paying for this wedding," and she was hurt. And Harry did come to her and apologize, and he wrote her a letter because she said, "I don't know how this is being planned." Charles was involved in the music for Harry and Meghan, which was good because he knows a lot about it. But Harry finally wrote her a letter to sort of fill her in on what was happening. But that's not right. She should have known from the very beginning. She certainly knew everything about what was going on with William and Kate's wedding, and she was thrilled with it. So this was I think, a measure of disrespect that they both showed to her.
To your point about Jemima, the nickname Jemima, I've seen other people challenge you on that, but Katie Nichol actually came out and said she called her Jemima to me too. So I just wanted to
She
make
did.
sure you had that
Yes.
support there.
Yes. No, I noticed that when Katie wrote it because I knew that Katie was also having tea with her and seeing her, and Katie and I actually talked about it. But yes, she used that word with Katie as well.
Oh, that's go ahead, Dickie.
No, I was saying about Harry being driven. I think he was being driven. He wasn't doing the driving, and everything was being led by Meghan. You know, Sally, talking about the wedding, father didn't come over. He'd had heart issues and was advised not to travel. Harry's father said that he would walk Meghan down the aisle, but like a drama queen, she said, "Yeah, I'll meet you halfway," sort of thing.
I know.
You know, you either do the whole thing or you don't do it. But to meet halfway, you know, because then she had the whole stage or part of the stage to herself. The whole thing
Yeah.
was contrived, and quite
Yes.
frankly, it should never have happened.
I mean, I thought it was very kind, very thoughtful of Charles once he knew that the father couldn't attend, to make that offer, and it would have been a better gesture on her part to say, "You can walk me all the way."
Yeah.
But I also, again, this is something that I was looking in my notes this morning, but one thing that Liza thought would be a problem is that after Meghan spent Christmas at Sandringham in 2017, which was unusual because they weren't married; they were engaged, and
They're racist, but they'll let me come to the Christmas early.
yeah, but both Harry and Meghan, and maybe just Harry, said that Meghan had the best Christmas of her life, and as Liza said, that was like waving a red rag in front of a bull when it came to her family, because she said, how could her family have felt when they heard something like that? And they came out and they said some things about it, quite understandably. And Liza said if she hadn't said something like that, it was possible that her brother could have at least been with her if her father couldn't have been. But that never happened. And for reasons that are still mysterious, she completely cut her father out of her life. She never introduced Harry to him. And as we all know, he has never met his grandchildren, which I just find to be unforgivable, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Dickie, do you have a reaction?
Yeah, it just beggars belief, the whole thing. Harry is weak. He was very strong when he was in the army. He was a good Apache helicopter pilot, but then, you're in the army, you take orders. And he's married, he takes orders. He does what he's told and he jumps. And it's very unfortunate that it has come to this. He wants allegedly reconciliation. I don't think it'll happen because he can't be trusted. Anything he might say to his father immediately gets reported in the press, whether it's Harry saying it or pillow talk and she says it. So reconciliation, don't hold your breath on that one, quite frankly. Despite communications meeting in London a few weeks ago, you had Meredith Maines over here, who's their head honcho in terms of communications and head of the organization, meeting Liam Maguire, who's head of PR over here for the Sussexes. They seem to have a lot of people on PR side, but never getting it actually right. Meeting with Tobin Andre from the Palace. I think the whole thing was a setup. How come there was a photographer in Green Park to take a photograph?
Yeah.
Because they've been told,
right.
We're meeting at the Royal Overseas League. We're going to be on the balcony having a drink. It's a nice day. Why not sit outside? And the photograph was taken. I think the whole thing was a setup. I think it was set up to get wheels turning over here within the media, because the media jumped on it immediately and said, secret meeting to reconciliation. And that's the way they do things. They don't go straight to the horse's mouth to discuss things because they can't. because anything they discuss or he discusses with his father immediately gets reported on the American networks and in newspapers. And until his father can trust him, and at the moment he can't, there's not going to be a reconciliation. And as for William, don't hold your breath on that one.
Yeah, no.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned Harry in the military. Katie Nicholl talks about her meetings with Lady Elizabeth Anson in Vanity Fair. And she said she couldn't understand how Harry, who had loved his military career and had been devoted to duty, could change the way he did. In this conversation happened in 2020. It's so sad that at her age, having to manage the most amazing reign, it has been sullied. He has hurt her beyond belief. And also, to your point, Sally, back to your notes, Harry went on the radio, I think shortly after Christmas too, and said Meghan didn't really have a close family, or Meghan had, oh my gosh. And of course her family's going to rage.
Yeah. And it was so gratuitous. He didn't need to say that. Obviously they had a lovely time, and she was, she was welcome. That's the thing, Lady Elizabeth's initial reaction, I think the Queen's initial reaction, they thought she would be very good news. I was in this weird position because I was hearing these things from Lady Elizabeth in the run up to the wedding, and then I had to do some commentary on it. Obviously, it was nothing that I was going to speak about because, everybody was at the wedding, everybody was in love with Meghan, and in the months after that. It was only in the following fall when I was in England and I was at a dinner party, and there were people there who knew Harry and William very well, and they were beside themselves because Meghan was running roughshod over everybody, and nobody could figure it out. Nobody could figure out why Harry was so was just folding at every turn, and that was when I thought, oh my gosh, this whole thing is beginning to unravel. That was the autumn of 2018. And I think 2 weeks later, the Fab Four broke up and the Royal Foundation was cut in two. But they were sort of dumbstruck. And these were people who were very discreet, but they couldn't, they said, Harry, as one of them said, Harry doesn't know what hit him, but he was totally besotted. And as Liza said, he's not very strong, and she is.
Yeah, well, I think she said smart too.
And smart.
It does make me giggle. Katie Nicholl goes into the fact that Harry and Meghan announced that they're going to step back as senior working members of the British royal family, and Lady Elizabeth, Liza, as Sally has permission to call her, but not me, whispers to Katie Nicholl that the Queen had hoped that when they came back for their final event, their Commonwealth Day engagement, March 2020, the Queen had hoped that they would bring Archie over, and she was so disappointed that they didn't. We just, heard Sally say that Thomas Markle hasn't even met these grandchildren. How resentful are these children going to grow up when they are old enough to read in the history books that these people longed for them and that they were kept from them?
Well, what is interesting in that is that Meghan was the one to whinge when they were born. They didn't have titles. Now, they're not entitled to titles because when they were born, the Queen was still alive. And they're only entitled to titles from their grandfather on the sovereign side. So when Charles came to the throne, they got their titles. But what do the titles mean in America? They mean absolutely nothing. Americans aren't interested in titles. They think, oh, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. That's wearing a bit thin now as well. But it's the way Meghan was going on about them not having titles, and particularly in the Oprah interview. Well, they weren't entitled at the time.
But she also says it was because of race, Dickie, which was so vile. She says it was because of skin color.
Absolutely nothing to do with it at all. I hear time and time again, people say the first Black Duchess. She's not Black. By her own admission, she's biracial. If you decide that she is an African American, where does that put her father? It's a bit like saying Obama is an African American. Where does that put his mother? Because his mother was white. Meghan's father was white. She is biracial. She said right at the very beginning she is biracial, and bringing this into the royal family will be a great help and a great understanding within the Commonwealth. So, to talk of racism with the royal family, it is absolute nonsense. When you look at their dealings across the world, Sophie going to parts of Africa that nobody else would go to deal with issues involving women. The king is head of the Commonwealth. He's been almost to every Commonwealth country. That is not racism. That's got nothing to do with racism. But it's very convenient that if something goes wrong, are they racists?
Yeah.
When it doesn't go your way, are they racist? It's a card. It's a wild card.
The Queen, Nelson Mandela, was one of the two people who were allowed to call the Queen Elizabeth. And they had a very, very close relationship. And she was very important in working on Margaret Thatcher at that moment when they were trying to end apartheid with sanctions. And she has been very mindful of all the issues involving Commonwealth nations all around the country, whether it's, all around the world, whether it's the little islands that are threatened by climate change. And she was exceedingly aware and not the least bit racist. And the same could certainly be said for King Charles and Prince William, and for that matter, everybody.
Right.
They just don't have. And the one thing that was said after the Oprah interview was when William just said, when he was at an event, and he said, "We are not a racist family." And that's the only thing he has said. And then, of course, it later emerged that the so-called racist remark, which we don't even know whether it was true or whether it was said, was alleged to have come from Charles and Catherine.
Yeah.
And
that's according to Omid Scobie's Endgame.
According to their official biographer, Omid Scobie.
I want to ask you
both. Well, you don't take any cognizance from Omid Scobie. He's not an official biographer. That gives him credibility, and he doesn't have any.
No,
but you're talking about racism in the early 1960s when Ghana was seeking independence. There was a lot of concern amongst the British government about Ghana looking towards the Soviet Union, as was for support and financial support. And the Queen was due to go there for a Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. And the government didn't want her to go, and she insisted on going. Not only did she insist on going, she actually danced with Kwame Nkrumah, which raised eyebrows amongst the Foreign Office officials. But she danced with Kwame Nkrumah, as she did with Kenneth Kaunda in Zambia. So forget about racism. It doesn't exist within the royal family.
Right. Kenneth Kaunda also called her Elizabeth. Nobody else did, just he and Nelson Mandela.
Sally, what about these reports from Katie Nicholl that the Queen was disappointed that she'd only met the children a couple of times? She was quite surprised, according to Lady Elizabeth, to hear from Harry on Zoom. It was all new to her, but it was the only way she could see her great-grandchildren. She told me that Archie has red hair. I mean, how disappointing that really not only did COVID hit, but they're just simply so far away. And Harry's trying to get your team to organize Zoom meetings. It just feels so unfair.
Well, it is. And it's particularly unfair to their grandfather, to Charles. I mean, I think, as you mentioned earlier, they will look back and they will say they were deprived of two of their grandfathers. They have had a grandmother who's around a fair amount, Meghan's mother, but there's a whole raft of Windsor cousins that they don't know, and not least being William and Kate's three children, but also the Tyndall children and the Edinburgh children, and there are just so many. And one of the things that was characteristic of previous generations of the royal family is that they had these cousins and they had these really good relationships with them. When Diana died, Peter Phillips and was up at Balmoral, and Princess Anne's son, and he was important. It was important for him to be there, to be a support to William and Harry at that awful time. Cousins are important, and they have none.
Yeah.
And it's just really sad.
Dickie, Richard Kay covers this story, covers Lady Elizabeth talking to Sally Bedell Smith, and also offers some new insight of his own, and talks about kind of to give some credibility to Sally's revelations, talks about how he recently spoke to a courtier who always found Queen Elizabeth to be so friendly over the phone. And the job was somebody would ring you up, you'd answer the phone, they'd ask for Queen Elizabeth, you'd ask who it was, and then you would connect them to Queen Elizabeth, and Queen Elizabeth would answer the phone, and then she'd say, thank you very much. And then you would connect the two and you would dip out. And this courtier or this palace employee received a phone call from Prince Harry, tries to connect Harry to Queen Elizabeth, and Queen Elizabeth goes stone cold. No, thank you so much. No encouragement to pass Harry along. And the individual was so uncomfortable that they went, thank you, Your Majesty, or something to that effect, to try to like cut the silence. But they said that their takeaway was that that was a call Queen Elizabeth was dreading. And we understand that she did kind of dread hearing from Harry towards the end of her life. Does that story ring true to you when you think about everything that happened?
Well, it probably does ring true. The telephone operators at Buckingham Palace are probably the best in the world. There's the old story of Sally was saying about how Queen would talk to her mum and her sister on a daily basis. And the telephone operator would phone up Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and say, Your Majesty, Her Majesty is on the phone. And the phone would be connected and they'd get chatting away. And that happened every day, wherever they were in the world. As far as Harry is concerned, I think probably the late Queen was caught on the hop, because you don't expect the phone operators at the palace, because they are the gatekeepers to phone calls coming in to members of the royal family. You do not get through direct. You do not necessarily get through to a private secretary direct. They will ask first who it is and then call the private secretary. So-and-so's on the phone. Private secretary says, okay, put them through. The late Queen was probably caught on the hop. We don't know what time of day this was. And she'd already had a lot of trouble from Harry and Meghan, and didn't want any more trouble, and wondered what was coming across on the telephone. And when the operator called and said, Your Majesty, Prince Harry is on the phone, yeah, the Queen would have been stymied. The fact that Harry had called, why is he calling? What does he want? And a stunned silence. And the operator was left with no choice but to say, Your Majesty, Prince Harry is on the line. And the Queen would have dealt with it. Very difficult situation. They are the diplomats personified at the switchboard of Buckingham Palace. They are, I say, the best in the world. They used to be a terrific buffer for me when I was press secretary. I'd get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning and they'd say, oh, so-and-so has called. They want to know X, Y, Z. Do you want to talk to them? And I said, no, I don't. And they'd go back and say he isn't available. Usually it was a ridiculous question. So they are very good gatekeepers. But Queen would have been caught on the hop with that one.
I have one more thing that I want to just remind everybody about Harry, and it's something that Liza Anson said to me, and she said, the Queen had been extremely fond of Harry. She was very, very proud of his military service. And she said to me, when the Queen delegates, the star is Harry. So she was predisposed to be very fond of him, to love him. And I think it was a real shock for her when he began treating her discourteously after he and Meghan got together. Nevertheless, she was still, despite all of that, she was still willing to give Meghan and Harry significant roles in the royal family, especially in the Commonwealth, where Meghan's biracial heritage could be a real help. And And they really didn't appreciate that. They took on the roles and they didn't do very much with them, as they didn't do very much with anything that was given them to carry out their duties and to serve. But I think it's worth remembering that the Queen was very fond of Harry, and even if he considered himself somewhat bitterly as the spare, she treated him with a great deal of affection and respect.
That's very
Well,
important.
you say spare. Edward was a spare, and Edward has won through. Andrew was a spare, and until
Yeah,
he started mixing business with pleasure, he was doing incredibly well. He was a good helicopter pilot in the Royal Navy. He flew helicopters with distinction in the Falklands War, but it all went wrong when he left the Navy after 20 years,
yeah,
got a job as a roving ambassador for British trade, mixed with the wrong people, and the rest is history. And I just want to recap slightly. There's a lot of talk about why the Queen wouldn't let Harry and Meghan have one foot in, one foot out. She'd already experienced that with Edward and Sophie in the late 90s, early noughties. Edward was a television producer. Sophie was a public relations consultant. They were doing their job as well as doing royal duty. There was a conflict of interest, and it didn't work. And she wasn't going to let it happen again. And she said to Harry and Meghan, either in or out, but you
yeah.
can't have both. They chose out, get on with it.
Yeah.
Perfectly reasonable. Also, two more spares. George V was a second born son, as was George VI, and they both became king. So it's, I mean, even though Harry is now way, way down the line of succession,
Thank God.
it's not an automatic negative.
Yeah.
But you've got to work hard as a royal. When Charles finished his military career, he did the army. He jumped out of aeroplanes with the SAS. He learned to fly aeroplanes, and his chosen career was the Royal Navy, and he commanded a minesweeper, HMS Bronington.
Right.
But when he finished, he had to decide for himself what he was going to do. It wasn't handed to him on a plate, and he established, with his payoff of £7,500, which is what, $10,000, to establish the Prince's Trust, a multi-million-dollar organization helping tens of thousands of young people. Nothing is handed on a plate. You've got to work for it. And Harry and Meghan seem to think that everything should be handed on a plate to them.
Yeah.
Edward didn't have anything handed to him on a plate. He
all.
flunked the Royal Marines. He should never have gone in the first place. And his father didn't berate him for that. His father kind of felt sorry for him that he had chosen it. But he established, and he went to work for the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme for the international scheme, plus a few other charities. Sophie did the same. Catherine's done the same. William established himself. Why couldn't Harry establish himself?
Yeah.
Princess Anne, look at her. She established herself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Harry wanted everything.
Yeah, no, and I remember talking to people who advised William and Harry, and they had a very well-conceived plan for Harry. They were quite mindful of what had happened to Andrew and how he had gone, wayward, and they had specific goals for him that would carry him through, through middle age and beyond. And they were very thoughtful about it. And he just sort of turned his back on all of that.
To make his wife a
It's the old
star.
adage.
Make his wife a star.
It's the old adage. My mother, who's no longer around anymore, she used to say to me when I was very much younger, tell me who your friends are and I'll tell you who you are.
Yeah. You are who you associate with. And Tyler Perry's not looking very good right now. All right. Agree with us, disagree with us. Let us know in the comments below. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. Dickie Arbiter, Sally Bedell Smith. It's been so fascinating talking to the both of you. And, hugs to Lady Elizabeth Anson, who gave us so much content. I'm so glad you had that time with her, Sally. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again next time.